So we will go ahead now and jump into our first view, which I like to make the ISO view, and that's the first one we're gonna do. So I go ahead and I open up just the ISO view first. I do not really care to edit here in the page. It can be a little confusing with all the different things going on, all the different selections. The only time I tend to do that is if I'm going to be adjusting the views against another view. I just want to make sure there's no clashing, but for now I can kind of understand what is and isn't going to be in the way. I can go ahead and move my selection box to include some more elements that I want to see here in this view. Let's go ahead and do that. Come down just a hair. And again, your template is what's dictating a lot of what's going on here visually. So again, you can see we've got this entire conveyor here, this ductile iron pipe, some supports, all these different elements here are going to be dictated by that template. Now, in the SysQue system, they lock the 3D view so that they can add tags and you can add dimensions. To unlock it for whatever reason, you would hit unlock right here, and now you are free to move that view. If you do not like what you've done and you want to go back, just hit the lock, restore orientation, and lock view, and you get all those elements back. But if you were to change the selection, for instance, if I couldn't tell exactly where this particular, oh, that's another thing, the crop view, that is, in and of itself can be quite annoying. But if I couldn't tell where this particular grit system ended and I wanted that to be included, when I go ahead and go back, I adjust it and restore, that grit equipment is now visible even though I've restored it back to its previous view. So the selection box is not part of the return. Now, going back to the crop view, if you adjust your 3D view, as you can see here, the crop view is here, you're gonna have to play a game between the crop view visibility at all times. It's one of those things that's kind of annoying about the process, but it is what it is. The crop view is gonna be your friend in some cases if you're working with ISOs and other things, but it can be kind of annoying at times, and I'll show you what I mean by that here. So for instance, if I was to hit unlock view and I hit front, you'll see that the view will change, but the crop region is going to dramatically shift in one way or the other. So now my crop region is here, and if I were to load this back into the project, I will not be able to see my elements. If I crop the view, which you want to crop the view, you do not want to rely on your section view for all the cropping. You would need to move your crop region over to the location of where your element is. And you can see that here in a minute when we get to a couple of the others. I'll pause the fast forward and show you that particular part and walk you through it. But again, we'll get to that in a minute. But you're always going to be dealing with that crop region. But for now, I think we're good here. I will go ahead and crop that view. I want to go ahead and bring this back in. I think that's a little bit too much information. It could be sticking out too far in my sheet. I just want to have just the right amount. And now that I'm happy with that, I am going to hit Visual Graphics Settings, VG, go to my annotation, SE for selection or section box, hit space, and I'm going to go ahead and take that off because I want to work with a fresh view. This is what I want to see. I will do a selection across the entirety of the view, filter, and I'm only going to deal with the tags. So tag, tag, tag for accessories, fittings, and pipe tags. Hit apply. And personal preference, you can leave it, but I tend to delete them right off the bat. SysQues are sometimes placed well, sometimes not. It's a personal preference, but I don't mind taking a couple seconds to make it better. So I will now hit TG, which is my tag tool. If for whatever reason the tags that you have loaded in the project are not correct, you'll go to the selection for tags. Again, that's right here. You hit tags, you'll go down to your accessories, your fittings, and your pipes, and you can also add revision cloud tags. But we'll go ahead, and now that I've got it set up, if I'm going to be manually adding tags, I want there to be a leader for my fittings and my accessories, but not on my pipes if I can help it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have free-ended without a leader, and I'm going to do all my pipe tags, which are the circular ones. And SysQue tries to be on one side or the other of the center line. I'll typically just drag it over to the center, and I'm selecting each individual pipe segment that I can and adding a tag. And this process takes a little while. It's not too bad, but in this particular instance, you see when I go to put this over there, it covers up more than one element. In this particular instance, I would do a leadered element for that particular pipe. And there we go. But I want to get the major pipes first before I start doing leaders, because once I've hit the leader element, now I'm just going to go through and start adding all of the elements that have leaders on them. And again, it's a personal preference. I try to keep everything either on the same plane as far as the bottoms here, on the same slant. It's just a visual thing. If it looks good, it's a little easier to read in my personal opinion. Another thing that I tend to do with my drawings are whenever I get to accessories, they're better. They're better, and so the numbers are higher than the other tags. Just again, it's an odd thing, but the visual aspect of it, in my mind, makes sense. It looks better on paper, both actually on paper and for differentiating the importance of an element. So that is what I would do, and that is an entirely completed tagging process for an ISO view. I don't really add dimensions on a 3D view unless we're talking spans of greater than 100 or so feet of pipe. Typically, I will only do an ISO view at that point, and I will give long general dimensions, because when they're over 100 some odd feet, there's typically no inline instrumentation that is critical to location. At that point, they're getting from point A to point B. They just need to know a general layout, so I will give them a general layout. For this kind of thing though, we're just going to give them elements, and that ISO view is just for them to get an idea of what they are working in. So I will go ahead and put this in the bottom left hand corner, and I've found that I typically end up putting stuff in the bottom left hand corner when it comes to ISO views, but they can end up wherever it needs to in order to better fit your sheet layout here. So we'll go ahead and go to the next one I tend to do is the plan view. That is the top down view, and because we set up the depths correctly, it's going to go ahead and show us all the way down to that ductile iron pipe. At this point, I'm going to show my crop region, and I also want to go ahead and turn off my crop view. The reason I want to do that is because both of these need to get expanded. I don't like seeing slivers of views. I want there to be at least a couple feet, either visually a couple feet, obviously not on your sheet, you're not going to have that large of a sheet, but I want there to be enough room that you're not suffocating your dimensions, you're not really causing a visual nightmare of layouts. And I also want to make sure that I have enough other elements, whether it's structural or mechanical, to dimension off of. I do not want to have an internal dimensioned pipe system. They're not going to be pulling pipe dimensions and tape on what they've previously laid out. Typically they want to pull off of a reference, so I will try to make sure that there is a decent reference available for them to make sure that they're within the same area. For instance, when we get to these T's, I'll try and reference the center line of this equipment, because the center line on that equipment is very easy to see visually on the equipment. They can line up, but also the edge of these pads. But for now, we'll just use the center line of this equipment. That being said, I can only see a little bit of this equipment. So in this case, I'm going to go hit unlock. I want to go down, and I've already turned off the crop view. So when I change, it is not going to crop the view. I want to go to the front, and I just want to bring this up just a little bit so that when I see the top view, it has a little bit more information about where it is in relation to the different equipment in this area. And that, I believe, looks perfect. I'm going to go ahead and restore the orientation and lock that view. And now when I do that, it resets the crop region. So you'll see that it reset the crop region. And again, you're gonna just be always fighting the crop view. It's part of the process. So now we're back to the beginning. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select across. I want to select all of these tags. Check none, tag, 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 apply, OK, and delete. Now we are in the point where I'm actually going to start adding dimensions. And this is the point where you're going to have to make a judgment on where a start and where the end of a dimension leader line is started. Are you going to start from the edge of a fitting? Are you going to start from the center of a fitting? The best thing to do, if you have access, is go talk to the guys in the field and see exactly what they want. A lot of times you'll be dealing with crews that have been doing this for years, that know exactly what they're doing, that have an understanding of what each takeoff lay length on these pipes and fittings are. And then there's other times where you may be dealing with crews that don't have the ability to do that just yet. They're still learning, or they are on a crew that has the ability to do that, but they themselves haven't got that skill to recognize a center dimension and be able to take off the distance to get there. Now, when we create these bill of materials, these particular elements do have a length. And in that bill of materials, if for instance this number, which we can find out here, this element number 5, for instance, has a length of 2'1". Now, as we saw when I clicked on that element here, it's actually 2 foot and 57/64 of an inch. So much more detailed here, but as far as the crew is concerned, they do not need anything more than a 16th. That is the greatest dimension I'll give them, is up to a 16th. Sometimes even an 1/8 is more than they need. But where you set a dimension is gonna dictate a lot of if you get questions or not, or it can cause more problems down the line. So just know where you're gonna put dimensions. So we'll go ahead and start with that. DI is how I get to my dimension tool. And a quick thing to note is when I go to SysQue and I use that system prefab manager, when you use that at any fitting, SysQue adds what they call an atom. And an atom is a really good tool the first time you create a spool. It's a really great tool the first time. If you have to go back and edit any of the pipe in a major way, these become a pain, and it's a little difficult to deal with at that point. However, they are very fantastic because, as you'll see when you go to dimension, they have lines that will kick out to tell you the center point. You don't have to go in and pick the center. It will give you a line for both horizontal and vertical, both in the section view and the plan view. So that's a very good tool to have when dimensioning. So a lot of times I will give dimensions to the center of a fitting because it will already tell me that. So that's what I'm going to do. So 4'8". Go ahead into the next one. 7 foot. 7 foot. And for this particular instance, I'm going to go to the end cap. Go here. No changes here. Sometimes you may need to change the legs, where they come off of. And in this particular instance, I think that looks pretty good. Now I will also do a dimension in up down direction here. So from here, I may want to go off of a good reference point would be this center line of this particular mechanical piece of equipment. But I really think a good one would be the large pad for the grid equipment. And the reason I came out here is these lines here can grab your dimension, and you can always just move that back later, but I didn't want to have to deal with that. A lot of times you may have to go back in, and if you forgot to do an element, I purposely left this one out, but for instance, I don't have the center line on this particular element. I will go in to this dimension tool here, sometimes it's hard to grab, go back to edit witness lines, and because there's not really an easy way to select that center, I'll go to wireframe, and most of the time, sometimes it won't, sometimes it will. When you're dealing with circles, you can get points like that. So there it goes, it adds one, and I'm happy with that. The last thing I want to check is I'm going to the 16th. I've got my dimensions. Is this the specific dimension one I want to use? I want to say it is. I have not created a dimension for myself here. Sometimes I will set up my own linear dimensions, my own branching dimensions, depending on what I'm dealing with. But for right now, this works fine. Go ahead and turn that off, shaded. And now if I'm happy with the dimensioning, I will also I've started to get into the habit of doing a full length layout. I'll go ahead and do that to the very end, just so that they can get a rough idea of exactly the length that they're working with, which is 19'3". And just do another dimension to, say here, that front pad there. And if I don't like that it's overlapping, I will drag it out, and now it has its own little leader to it. And for this case, I think that's good. I'll hit TG and go ahead and start tagging items. Again, I'm going to start off with the leaderless. Just get those large pipes out of the way. I want to make sure that these all get those tags first, and you can see that it's snapping to that center. If there is another element on that same working plane, so there it goes, it adds it. Now that I'm ready to do my leaders, I will go ahead and add them. And I try to avoid putting leaders in the way of the dimensions. I don't want them clashing. I don't want them viewing weirdly. It's cleaner that way. And as you can see, when I click once, I then have set that point and I have the ability to go again. Best practice is to avoid having multiple bends in your leaders. Go ahead and only do the single line leader, and the reason for that is as soon as you start doing multiple leads, it becomes confusing to where that leader goes. They have to spend a little bit more time visually finding what you were referencing. It just makes more sense to have the single element leader, and as you can see, I'm having to tab in to select the element, and now I'm hovering over it. Sometimes you may have to tab multiple times. Here we'll do up because I don't want it to be interfering with this particular leader line. Same thing here, 7 and 7, make those consistent. And now I'm going to try and get this number 10 right at that line, and sometimes I'll do that where I'll go through and it matches the dimension line, so it's not interfering in terms of visually, it's crossing over that, but it's showing that number 10 is between those two dimensions there. Lastly, I'm going to do this fitting here. Now I recognize that it's not the last fitting. I know there are fittings down here at the bottom. It is a preference of mine that on the visual style from the reference plane down, I will try to get everything that is in view. I don't want to get stacked elements, because as soon as you start seeing, for instance, if I were to do number 7 here, and they can't see number 7 clearly, they may confuse this particular element with number 7. Now, in this particular case, if they read the bill of materials and saw that that was a male connector, they would pretty quickly understand, hey, that's incorrect. But for some other instances when that's not always the case, it can be difficult to differentiate. So now I went ahead and turned the crop view back on, and we'll turn off the crop region. So now I'm left with this clean looking slate. VG, go to my sections, SE, turn it off. And again, that's a personal preference. When you export, it won't always have your section views on. depending how you set up your sheet, but that is my personal preference. So now I'll go ahead and close that. And now you can see kind of how we're shaping up here on the sheet. I'll go ahead and move that down. Preference is to have it in the bottom left corner, all the way here on the right. And then I have a view that is set up. And as you can see, that little leader line, it tells me that this view is a direct mirror of what is below it. So it's the same scale and it's in the same plane. So if for whatever reason they wanted to do a detailed line element on review or whatever element thing they wanted, if they were to draw a line between those two, they are in the exact same location, just different views of each other. And I try to keep that as consistent as possible because that's really helpful just visually to understand that those are the same elements. So lastly, we're going to go into the elevation view. So if I'm going to do the elevation view, I'm happy with this cut section. I don't want there to be a lot of foreground and background information. I want just the pipe. So this particular section is perfect. I'm going to add maybe a little bit of elevation to this to see a little bit here. In fact, I might just add a hair to, again, I'm going to turn off that pesky crop view in order to see what I'm working with. I'm going to add just a little bit of depth because I really don't want to just see that weird part of the conveyor. I want to see just enough to recognize, hey, that's the conveyor. So that's perfect. That is exactly what I want to see. Go down just a little bit so I have that center line, maybe even part of that support. Not too much. There's no support though, so that's good. So now we're going to go back, restore the orientation in view, and I may need to adjust that crop. And it looks like I will. So you can see, even though I moved my section out, the crop view does not fit perfectly off the bat. I will adjust that. So now again, select all my tags, filter, check none, tag, 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 apply, okay, and delete. Now, if I'm going to add dimensions here, you will see I'm going to hit DI and I'm going to get a chime. You may not have heard that, but it chimed at me, letting me know that I cannot add dimensions. Why can't I have dimensions? I've already locked the view, it's ready, but there's one key element that we have forgotten. We do not have a working plane to add those dimensions to. So you can go to the architectural or structural tab. I believe you can also do it on a couple others, but for the most part, I'd stick with the architectural. It's the first one there. Go to set and a work plane and pick a plane. This is another instance of where those atoms come in handy. So I can zoom in and I know there's an atom here that I can work with, but in case you don't see them, go ahead, go to wireframe, and again, at your fittings, you will find the atoms if it's properly been done in the prefab manager. Now, I want a plane that is perpendicular, or excuse me, parallel, I guess. It's in my view, right? If I'm going to be drawing on a piece of paper, I want that plane to be the same as the paper. It can be closer to me if I pick a wall, even though the pipe is further back, as long as it's in the same visual space, because these are orthographic, it doesn't really matter. So for this case, these atoms come in handy. I will pick this circle here, click on that, and now my work plane is tied to the face of that circle. And again, I'll go ahead and show you the shaded version here. You can see why that works, because these atoms have 3D elements to them, so they have faces. So when you select that face, it automatically sets that as the work planing face. So that's a really nice feature that is included there with those atoms. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my crop region. I'm happy with my section box. Go ahead and turn that off because I just don't want to see it. Again, that's VG and then annotation SE space and then I hit OK. That's how I do that. Now I'm going to go do dimensions, right? So I'm going to go dimension off the floor for my first one, and I will do the underside of the pipe. The reason I do that is because when an engineer is going to pick their supports for this particular pipe, knowing what the offset from the top of concrete to the bottom invert of that pipe, so the outer diameter at the bottom, is crucial to make sure that they've got the right supporting mechanism. In this case, 3 1/4 is what I use for double strut. So they will be using a double strutted system because eventually this will be insulated because it is water outside. So 3 1/4 is what they told me to do. That's what I'm gonna do. And then if I do off the wall here, excuse me, grab the center wall there. Off the wall here, 5 1/16. They will be using a different supporting means here. And I think they may even get away with not having a support here because they're gonna have a support under this main ductile iron and because it is supported at the top. But regardless, I wanna make sure they have the proper information. So I'll go ahead and leave those. If you wanted to, you can click on that particular element, click on the number, click on here. And if you wanted to, you can add typical. But I tend not to do that only because in this case, it's not always typical, but they can infer, and you'll see how I will do that for them, that this particular pipe runs with 0 slope and will be at that specific elevation throughout the duration of its life cycle there. So, like I was saying, the elevation on this pipe is going to stay the same. So once I've gone ahead and I've done my dimensions, again, they'll probably be similar to that of the dimensions from the top-down view, and that's okay if they're duplicates. I'm not too worried about that. If they only looked at one view, I want them to make sure that they get all the information they need. We'll go ahead and do my total length here. And the difference between the one before and this one is that now I have the ability to add this particular dimension, one that they did not have before. So I'm going to add that. That is from the center line of that ductile iron. So that's 7'9" and 15/16. What is that in relation to? I am going to give them elevation information. So this particular elevation for the center line is 702.77. I'm going to add elevations to key information here so that they're able to, one, verify that against their shop drawings, against their contract drawings, whatever information that they can particularly use to verify. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that, got that all messed up there somehow. Go do this. Again, this is the way I personally lay out my elevations. I try to add one kicker on slabs, just so it has a little shelf for the elevation to sit on. And then if I think of anything else that might need an elevation, I will go ahead and add it. In this particular instance, I will add one to the center line of this ductile iron pipe. And a nice thing is, once you've hit that first click, similar to adding a tag, it locks it into that plane. And one thing I like to do is find the center of another one that's above it or in the same line. I don't have to be looking at the one that I'm setting. Click enter, and now both of those are basically on the same line. It just, again, it's a visual thing, but it kind of, those visual aspects add up to a overall good looking drawing. So now I've added all the dimensions I want to add. I think I've added all the elevations I want to add that are available to check. I'm going to now do a tag. So now, same as before, I'm going to add tag elements. Like I said, I'm actually going to do the large pipe first. Sometimes I swap it up. It really doesn't matter too much. If you have a long piece of pipe here, the dimension's always in the middle if you wanted to know. So you can add it there. Again, not trying to clash with those particular dimension elements. It'll snap to the center because other ones are already there. Again, it's just more of the same. And now you can see why it kind of takes a little while to do these, because they do take a little bit of time to get right. But once you start making headway, once you start really chugging away at these things, they get quicker and quicker and quicker. But for now, you just want to make sure that you've set them up properly beforehand, and now it's the process of actually doing the dimensioning and the tagging. So again, I'm going to try and add one here on that line. Looks good. Last one right here on that line. Do it on the corner. I like it. That looks good. I'm not missing any tags. I'm happy with this. Ooh, there is an element here that needs to be added. So this particular element, is this a 2-inch pipe? This particular element has a missing piece here. So this is 1.5 inches, this is 1.5 inches by 2. So I'm glad I caught this so we can show you. Edit assembly. So I want to add this particular element. I didn't grab it on accident. For whatever reason, I got left out. I'm gonna go ahead and hit finish and hit add. Now it's gonna add it to that spool. It may mess up a couple of the crop views by resetting them back to what we had before. It will add a tag into all your views, but now it's added here visually. We'll go ahead and add that there. So now that's added. Perfect. Okay, cool. So we'll go ahead and close that. I'm sure we're gonna have to adjust some of this here. Again, that's good, that's good. Did it add number 9? Again, it added, and as you can see, it adjusted the crop region, but we already know our section view doesn't change, so I can just drag my crop region open until I'm encapsulating all the section that I had already done, and I can leave it wide because it does not matter. That is the wrong button. Click there. Wrong one, sorry. There, crop region view, I don't want. There we go. Perfect. Now go back to here, open this one up, and for this particular one, I will tag it because I do want to see it. Number 9, there we go. I'll add it in the same line here. Perfect. Crop isn't going to do me any better, or do any problems there. Deactivate. Actually, I forgot to get rid of it in this view again. I don't want this in this view because it's not really visible from that top down. Deactivate, and now we are set. And I will say, I'm going to move these over just a hair. That looks good to me. That is it. That is a full sheet, start to finish, of what it looks like to do one sheet. And again, I will show you how I do the next setup, which is going to be RW02, which has to deal with multiple elements of the same type. So they're all identical. I'm only going to show one view, and we'll go ahead and show you that here in just a second. But I just wanted to make sure from start to finish, that is the typical layout of how you're going to do a drawing. So that's it. Like that's the name of the game right there. Again, each person's going to have their own style. Each person's going to have their own template. But you just want to make sure that you have all the key elements that are needing to be shown. So I'll jump into the next one. I'll speed it up until I get to the point of adjusting my views, and then I'm gonna speed through the rest of this and come back to you guys when I get to the cover sheet. So let's get started.